Yes. Hi guys, welcome
Hi,
to yet another
Hello.
Mr. Talwar.
welcome to yet another session of Nitco Talks. And today we have fantastic young boutique designers who are with us, who are going to talk about uh, various things that are connected to the design that they do and the various questions that we have for them, as well as the questions that we will get from the audience. Let me do the introduction. Uh, Ali Baldiwala is a partner at Baldiwala Associates, known as Dad for a long time, professional consultants in interior design. Ali has been part of the creative involvement in designing interiors for commercial premises, residential, healthcare facilities, and public places. Being a hobbyist actor too, Ali infuses drama in his palette of various materials to script a pleasant living.
Thank you so much. Hi guys.
Welcome.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Talwar. Thank you.
Arjun Rathi. A select few names come to mind while discussing decorative lighting in the Indian design gamut, and Arjun Rathi is certainly one of them. Architect, industrial designer, and lighting expert, he has gained national and international recognition for his innovative approach towards materials and design processes. His studio, which focuses on designing and building decorative lighting, has been featured in almost every single design and lifestyle publication. Welcome, Arjun.
Thank you.
Priya Lakhotia Parekh graduated in 2010 with a Bachelor's of Interior Architecture from the prestigious School of Art Institute in Chicago. Chicago Studio, started by her, is an interior architecture firm specializing in the design, development, restructuring and beautification of commercial and residential spaces. Her studio is strongly committed to incorporating eco-friendly and sustainable solutions into its designs. They also design and produce their own furniture. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you. Thank you so
Hi, Priya.
much. Rajiv Khushalani. He is an architect, designer, and the founder of Khushalani Associates. Before establishing his own practice in 2010, he has worked in prestigious offices like Kapadia Associates, Mumbai, BLDA, and Raphael Vinoil Architects, London. Rajiv is frequently invited as a visiting juror in architecture schools across Mumbai. In the first year of its inception, Kushlani Associates became the only Indian firm to have featured in the prestigious
Evolo.
Evolo Skyscrapers competition for its project Porosity. Welcome, Rajiv.
Hi, thank you so much.
Well, the first question for Ali. What are the different roles a designer plays?
Well, I think on every project we have different roles, and we act them out differently. Right from becoming a peacemaker, a lawyer for the clients. When young couples, you have so many of these young couples who are there. Like at the end of it, when you're doing homes, you become a part of the family of that home because you get so close with the client and their family and their needs that almost feels like a home. And touch wood, by the grace of God, all the clients we work with in their homes, they become like family, and the relations have gone on for years, whether it's for my father or for me. So a lot of times with these young couples, especially, to become family and friends, we are like most of them is becoming a peacemaker there. That no, this happened. Like their fights go on not only design but other aspects. So sometimes they play the role of a lawyer. Sometimes on sides they play the role of so many different things. Right from I was just saying Rajiv yesterday when discussing this that there are times when I'm sweeping the floor on a finishing site. So, there's no ego, there's nothing. I mean, it's your baby at the end of it. So you become a sweeper on the side, you're a lawyer for the clients, and so many other different roles besides, just these funny ones, where where you have to think differently for the particular family that you're working for. Like think from the father's side, the mother's side, get it all together. So somewhere I think you're like a family member working in that space, but there's a thin line between the designer and the family member that happens over there. So I think there are a lot of roles that come along.
Even as a boutique practice, it's very difficult for us to kind of have too many departments in the office. So, apart from obviously being a business developer for your own practice, we also, I can speak for myself. I don't have a full-time accountant on board. We do accounts. We don't have an HR, for example. So there's a lot of HR we do within the office, handle our employees on a day-to-day basis. There's uh, there's a lot of things that we have. Personally, for me, I feel that we tend to even employ people who can take multiple roles rather than just doing what they are kind of supposed to be doing. That's how I kind of see our practice. It's still very flat in terms of we don't have too many hierarchies. So that's what I mean in terms of. I think I can speak for a lot of us, boutique designers in that sense.
I agree. I agree with you, Rajiv, because I have done from cleaning to my office, getting my computer repaired, getting things sorted, um, making coffee for my employees. I made it as such a family space. I believe that everybody knows how to do everything. So even buying the smallest essentials for my boutique, I have trained everyone that if you don't have this, if it's missing, please make sure that you can do it by yourself, because there are times when you don't have people around you, right? And you have to be a go-getter.
Yeah.
Even dropping off samples, I mean, it's just not, even I would like to go and, get inside the smallest of the detailing. And even if I have to go pick up a sample from a vendor, it is fine. It is absolutely okay. So I feel we have to manage all the tasks all the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, just to
Yeah.
sort of add on over there, like I think we all share a similar sentiment that when we started our practices, or even right now, we are following this very multifunctional role. And like one thing that I'd like to share, that we as a studio, what we're trying to do to sort of reduce individual dependencies on each other is
Yeah.
throughout the lockdown, we were researching on a lot of app systems that we could implement for the office. So
True.
these simple things of project management, where I felt like many times I was being the secretary for my staff, trying to remind them on tasks what people may have forgotten. And at some point, we try and hire a person to do that management role within the office to remind people what people's tasks are. We've started to take a more app-based approach in the last few months. And we're hoping to experiment with various management apps within the studio to make that process little bit more independent and sort of make us feel like little bit larger than what we are as a smaller 10-person studio at the moment.
Yeah.
So
App for sure, Arjun. I need that app.
Yeah.
I'll send you a list of apps for a
We
lot of
want
things
notes.
we've been trying to do.
Yeah, man, it's amazing.
Yeah, because I used to do my to-do list on post-its and stick on everybody's computer. This is your list. This is your list. This is your list to
But
do
that's
today.
true, what Arjun said right now. I think it's very important because I am doing that all the time. Like, I don't understand, like, why can't someone have the kind of responsibility that, okay, this is my task and, that this needs to be done. So if we have apps like that, that's amazing. And like we said, post-its, that's exactly what I also do. I'm
I mean,
making to-do list for them.
like, you'll be surprised, Ali. I have gone from 2 whiteboards to a big wall of only back painted glass for writing tasks. After that, then you've gone to the post-it system, and then we've gone to hiring people to make sure the other people are doing their work on time. And I realized, why not just have an app remind you? I get that Vodafone message every week that pay your bill, pay your bill, pay your bill. I pay my bill on the 5th message. So
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I feel especially is management of BOQs, right? So we make sure that whoever is on the project should know how to manage your BOQs, even writing down the smallest of the accounts of a client's site and not missing out on anything, because
Right.
we are managing our own accounts. So we have to get into the smallest of the detailing, and we have to make sure that everything is in place, is in order, from your BOQ management to your client meetings, to your minutes of the meetings, to not forgetting one single thing, even like making sure that your samples are done, making sure that things are executed on site, making sure even the workers are fine on site. I feel that is also a responsibility. So we are trying to like multitask and make sure that our firm is like all in one, you can say. And we are also all in one. That's why I guess we love our small boutique firms a lot.
Okay, so next question to Rajiv. What are some of the things that you do to bring on new clients?
Obviously, I mean, like most of us, even our firm has been very, very organic. I'll be very honest with you that most of the work that we've got has been word of mouth. Personally, I've been active on social media only in the last 1 year. That's because I've also kind of felt the need to, grow further, get more clients outside my social circle. But I think the best way to get more work is to do good work. Honestly, every project that we've got has been from a client that has seen a previous project of ours, has spoken to a previous client of ours. So that is, and that's never going to go. How much ever social media and however active we are on Instagram, clients would want to see, our work. We've also become very conscious of documenting our work. That's something that personally I never did in the first 5-6 years of my practice. In the last 3-4 years, we've been active in kind of trying to document our work so that we can kind of make a portfolio, show it to a new client. That was kind of a missed opportunity that kind of, we are working on. Apart from that, Bhagwan Bharose. I mean, just, I'll be honest about that.
I think for me, getting clients for us has been, like you rightly said, word of mouth is the most, the most obvious. But also for Instagram, I think how it plays an important platform is because I don't think we get clients. I've just got 1 or 2 clients through Instagram. But the good part is that we've started documenting and we put our projects up on social media right from start to finish. The entire project is there. So if you see our Instagram has got project wise, the entire project is there with content, the entire story, then the stories. We finish that for like say 1 or 2 weeks. We do that. So what we realized is at least even if the clients don't come through Instagram is a good way of showing your work, because nowadays I think anytime when a client asks for any creative agency, whether it's graphics, animation, interiors, architecture, any of fashion for that matter, every client goes on social media, goes on Instagram to check out the kind of work, to check out the kind of not.
I agree.
But yeah, to check out the kind of work that you're doing, and I think that induces them to come forward and gives them a little more confidence to come ahead to make that call, that first call. So maybe social media doesn't help in getting a client, more it just is like a platform to get that first call, is what I think.
In fact, the client told me, Rajiv, you're not on social media. Why don't you kind of put anything up? I was almost not going to close you till I saw your work. That's when I got conscious that there needs to be a presence. It gives you that kind of credibility when you are when you are talking to clients. So that's what I mean. Social media for me is to kind of just establish credibility more than kind of actually get work. So yeah.
Yeah,
So I think in terms of getting more work on our end, the practices partly product oriented and partly design oriented. I would say mainly 80% towards the product end where we are customizing a lot of lights. So the traditional approach of doing showcases, exhibitions was experimented extensively last year, exploring retail, and then the lockdown came in. And for the last 2 months, a lot of thinking was going through of what now new ways do we need to do to reach out there? Can we stand out in a different way? So one of the things that our studio is experimenting with, since we have a strong product sort of sector, is creating a virtual showroom. It was very hard to get people into retail showrooms even prior to the lockdown. You had to follow up constantly and request people to come by and see your quality of your work. Here, the idea is that we're trying to see if we can reach out to people through a virtual showroom that we are trying to develop right now. And that will help us sort of expand to a larger client base and a larger architect and designer base who we can cater to. Because As architects and designers, the only way we can get more clients is by expanding our reach. It's very hard to get a repeat client in our business. The guy will build his house once in 10 years, once in 15 years. He might like recommend you to his relative, or he may not, so the competition is very fierce in that. And the only way that you can get constant work is by expanding the markets that you're practicing in and by expanding your reach. So like always on the thought process of how we can make better plans to reach out to tier 2, tier 3 cities. And the virtual showrooms are going to be one way where we are trying to see. I think trying to mix technology and the internet in this way becomes a good way forward.
I agree, Arjun. And also, I feel your social networking or your reach to the right person or the right people is very important. The person who will like your taste or like your design, and you have to relate to them and build that trust factor. So if my client has really liked my work, he will 100% recommend me. And there are many times where there have been tips with your clients, so on the way to the process of finishing a project. And then sometimes things don't end up taking it forward. Maybe he might not recommend us. So I agree, there's a lot of competition out there. So social media marketing has become very important. Also, building the trust factor with your client is also very important, and a very good relationship with your client.
I'd also like to share just like one more thing which sort of helped me out in my practice in the early days was that the moment you start out your practice, start telling everyone you know. Start with your family, start with your family's friends. Make sure that each and every person knows that you are doing a certain type of work, and this is the type of people you're looking to connect with. And I don't think there's shame in asking that, hey, I'm looking to connect to this person. You know him, I've seen him on your Facebook list. Do you mind trying to help me with the connect? The worst thing is the person will say is no. So try and make the attempt to reach out to the type of people who you want to reach out, and you'll be surprised that many times it's quite successful.
I agree with that. In fact, for our showroom that we did for Abu Jani Sandeep Khosla, that happened like that. Because we have a kind of a mindset that it's not cool to be these cold calls because you're a designer. But I think sometimes you need to break the stereotype, and especially in a fierce competition world, a competitive world that we're living in right now, we can't really think about those kind of ethics. I'm not saying be like really rude or just go out there and throw yourself on the prospective clients. But there's no harm in absolutely saying what Arjun is saying. That's what we did for them. We said that they are designers themselves, they require our services. But they were looking out for a designer, and I just happen to say that no, is something like that happening if we have an opening, and they're at the store to design. So I think it's a great option to really.
I agree.
Arjun, you said that you need to constantly, constantly try to expand your market, try to enter new markets, things like that. So I was just wondering, how do you end up getting clients in different cities and things like that? Is it also mostly through social media, or?
So I think like it's actually, there is no overnight or one-way solution there, Nika. It's been over a series of years. Like, the more I evaluate and think about it, if you go back to 4 years back, from going to every design event with a small body of work, and each year as your body of work grows, it's very important to make people know what you finished. So there was a very interesting sort of saying by Frank Lloyd Wright, where he critiqued Corbusier that now that he's finished a building, he will go and write a book about it. But that was so important even back in that day. Corbusier finished a handful of buildings, and each one of those buildings are celebrated as masterpieces with a book behind it, talking about the theory and why he built the building and why he's even put the shades at certain angles. So it's important to talk about your work, make people sort of also sort of learn the deep thought processes which you've done into your project. I know most architects, when they sort of draw a line on paper, they've thought maybe 2 hours before they've drawn that line, because it has a meaning to that designer or what he's trying to do. He's not just sketching a wardrobe for the sake of it, over there. So if people know what thought process and the effort you put in, and people who will connect to that style of working, will always be a market for you in that way. And the idea of reaching out to tier 2, tier 3 cities is that we have to realize that with urban centers and the way our country is developing, it's very hard to distinguish a tier 2, tier 3 city these days. So as architects, we have to take a greater sort of an effort to move out of Mumbai, move out of Delhi, move out of the urban centers and go to where the work is, because those are our dream projects. We always dream of building a big house or a large sort of an office building or an institutional building as architects. So there's no land in the city. Like, where will you get the opportunity? So important to reach out to smaller towns.
That's what.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that's what we've been doing in our practice. I think we've been kind of focusing a lot outside Mumbai, because that's where I think we get the scale to kind of experiment and work with, and a lot of design freedom. I think, and which is very satisfying. So I completely agree with Arjun there.
In fact, like smaller towns and cities, like we did a store in Jaipur, a small retail outlet. They are ready to do any sampling you want. They will never say no to you. They said, yeah, this is possible, we can do it. So they're ready to explore with even the smallest design, smallest idea, with anything you want. You have the freedom of play to show your design out there, and people love it, actually.
I wanted to comment on what Arjun said, that he gets, you guys get a customer once. Maybe you won't come back again for 10 years. The same thing happens with us. Somebody who comes to buy tiles or marble is a one-time customer, because that's the home he's made and that's the home he's made. But you'll be surprised that almost 50% of our new customers come from references of existing customers. People who bought from us 5 years back also are referring people to
Absolutely.
work. They'll continue to refer through their life. So you'd always get people who are coming to you. So, you did that house, and then he was talking about it. I went to his house. The house was so nice, and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, it's
all word of mouth. Yeah.
No matter how much social media you do, if somebody talks well about you, that's, that is behind your back. That is amazing, because and somebody talks badly about you, no matter what you do on social media, it won't help, because people are talking badly.
That's true.
And when you talk about trying to convey your work or trying to get new work by trying to talk to people, even at this age, I'm constantly doing that. This morning, I went for a walk, and I was at Nana Chowk, and in one of the lanes, I saw one building under construction. I quickly took a photograph of the board and sent it to my marble team. I said, "This is a building, Ramdevi. This will be a building that will marble, and just connect with those guys." So there are two buildings which are almost up. So I said, quickly connect with them, because the building is up and time for marble to be fitted. Okay, question for Priya. What are the major challenges you face while dealing with clients?
That's a very touchy topic.
When you fight with them and you have things like that, you want to know, to hear some stories.
So yeah, obviously I feel like none of the architects ever fight with their clients, or they can't, or they don't want to. But there are a lot of challenges, I believe, that we all face while the project is on, even before the project. When we start designing the project, coming to a budget, coming to a conclusion, okay, this is the budget. So client will say, no, let's do it in this amount and this X amount. And we believe that we give you quality, and we know what the budget is going to be like and what it's going to come up to. So coming on terms with that, then contractors, there are so many times on the process of a project, there's a fallout with a contractor, and then the contractor is like, we're not going to do your work, and then we have to get another contractor on board, or we have to convince that same contractor, and then there's a thing with the client that what is happening, why isn't this happening? So I feel like there are so many small detailings and so many things we need to face with a client on a everyday basis, you know, while the site is on. It's just not, you know, like in phases. So one day the client will say that, okay, I don't like this design, change it. So what do? You have to sit and change the entire design, because in the end you have to respect your client, right? That's the key. No matter what, you believe that your design is better than theirs, but you still have to do it for them, and you still have to try and convince them that, you know, convincing power has to be super strong, be it for anything. Even with the contractor, even with the client, for your budgeting, for your design detailing, convincing power has to be super strong. Then I also believe like there are times when clients sometimes get into too much of detailing, which is not needed. Even like the smallest of thing, you find out about what the wood is, but getting into the detailing about what is the price of the wood, why is it so high? Okay, I found it cheaper here. Why is this person charging me so much? And you know, so then you have to come to like terms with that. You have to say like, okay, fine, you can go ahead with your vendor if you don't like this price. So I believe there are so many challenges day to day we face with each and every client of ours.
I think just to sort of summarize what even Priya is saying, like, I know there's this saying that half knowledge is a very dangerous thing.
I
And that
agree.
is where a lot of the client base sort of comes from. Like, you know, there are maybe broadly two categories of clients of what I've been able to like evaluate in the short time we've been practicing. There's a type of client who has, you know, like some sort of an understanding of what space is, and the other category who can't figure out what space is, you know, and that's where the half knowledge becomes very dangerous. It becomes challenging to deal on those projects on these variety of issues what Priya was addressing, whether it's budgeting, execution, design. And at some point, I think, just to add on to what Priya said, it's also okay as a professional to value your time and disconnect from a client if it's not working. Like, you know, clients on the other end don't uh, have a second thought if they want to disconnect from the project architect or the project designer for some reason where it's not working out. And it's very important for upcoming designers, rather than to chase the client, also add value to the profession and a certain sanctity to it. Because if the designers won't add that sanctity or value to the profession, I don't think our government's going to help us out. I mean, like, there's a new movement by the government where you don't need to have an architect to sign a building anymore, you know, and they're trying to pass that regulation through. So it's only us as a design community who can build strength in numbers, and it's important not to undercut each other, try and lowball each other in terms of fees or pricing. And I think that is something what a certain category of clients thrive on. Like, clients in general, we've had some of the best clients as well, though it's just sort of like something for the upcoming designers that grow together rather than sort of like trying to grow individually.
Yeah. You know, we've had a very funny experience with clients where we are always guessing what their real budget is going to be. For example, Mr. Talwar, you spoke about marble, and so I have an example to give about marble. So I had a client about 6 years back. I was doing this apartment in Bombay where he asked me, Raji, what should the budget of marble be? I said, you know, around let's say, I mean, depends on you what color and what kind of marble you want, but keep it between, you know, 500 and 1,000 bucks. Hey, so much. He ended up buying something worth 600 bucks, but you know, even 500 rupees was a lot for him. Then obviously I learned my lesson over time, and then I would obviously never give the real budget out first. I would let the client see the marble and then, you know, decide for himself. Recently I had another client who it was a really big house, and I was thinking that maybe he's trying to judge me on what sort of budgets I give him. He asked me, Rajiv, what should the budget of the marble be? I said, you know, I was a little scared and I didn't know how to react because he's a big guy. I told him, you know, between 700 and 800 bucks, and he's like, that's it. You know, I went to this house done by so and so architect, and you know, marble makes all the difference in the house. And how can you just use marble worth so much? You know, we should. So you know, you are, as a designer, and especially as a young designer, you really can't impose, I know some of the senior guys, they tell their clients, the budget is going to be 10,000 rupees a square foot, 15,000 rupees a square foot, take it or leave it. We can't do that. We can't afford to do that. So we always guessing, what our client's real budget is going to be. We're actually trying to fit in his shoes even before he becomes our client or she becomes our client. So that's a very tricky thing with a lot of clients. That's what we face.
It's very interesting to hear this talk, because we've actually been doing our talks with a lot of senior designers and established designers, where the reaction is completely different. They've passed that, and I guess you guys will be there soon. And there is one thing I like to say, and I like to repeat what Hafiz has always told me. He says, a good job is 70% client, bad job is 70% client.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot.
I agree.
Good patrons make good architects and good designers. That's for sure.
Arjun, any funny or interesting client stories you want to share?
I think a lot of my clients tend to be architects. That's one. I think I've had the privilege of knowing the nitty-gritties of most architects at sites, and I think that's where it remains in my mind at that point. But I think, just to sort of to sort of extend the question a little bit, I'd like to share that, some of the best experiences what we've had with clients, actually, in the sense that, there's a whole sort of generational shift of how clients are hiring us. We had recently done a project in the Hyderabad, and it was a private residence, and it was the first time we had done an Instagram paid promotion, and this was about 2 years back. And one client over there directly contacted us from that paid promotion. I was damn excited. My best 2,000 rupees spent, and this client has called me to do lights for the entire house. And she was designing her entire house by her own. There was no architect involved, no interior designer involved, a 7,000 square foot bungalow. She was doing the interiors of it, and we were designing the lighting for it. And it was really sort of nice to meet a client who shared passion for design. We had done the lights for the project. She and her husband flew down to Japan to buy chairs from a very specific carpenter, what they wanted in the house. They were able to source these very specific details, what we as designers sometimes tend to forget or lose out. And that sort of inspired the passion for me to sort of research on so many other materials and details, what we tend to take for granted sometimes, And it's also important to remember, it's always a two-way process with a client. Maybe your worst client has taught you the best lesson in your life of how to negotiate or how to handle a situation or what to say and what not to say. We learn from our failures or from the failures of our projects. And I'll share a second story. We're doing a lot of experimentation with sacred geometry for the last 6 years. 6 years back, a client gave me a book on sacred geometry as a gift and said that I want you to make a proposal for free for the entire property. And I was quite excited to sort of do that. But that one book he gave me on sacred geometry pushed me in a completely different exploratory sort of a direction. Where today we've been studying proportions year in, year out, making case studies within the studio, making products inspired from sacred geometry, making architecture and interiors inspired from sacred geometry proportions, all because a client gave a book, and how you take that knowledge and build upon it is very important. So it's also important to remember the two-way process.
I think for me, the funny incident would be this client around 6 years ago. We did his office in Nariman Point in Bombay, and believe me, he was not having a great financial year. So he got a Vastu consultant on board, spent a bomb on the Vastu consultant. I mean, to the extent that even the peon in the pantry was sitting in a way the Vastu consultant asked me to sit.
And Vastu terrace, Ali.
Huh?
Vastu terrace.
Vastu terrace. He would come down from some part of India. I don't know get that there, but he would come once for an hour in the month and give me points, and I would be jotting down those points. It was 7 years ago, so I used to make notes like a small student, like a very nerdy student. And I was like, no, and his client will be happy if I take his name, Gaurav Bhai. And he said that, I'll listen to everything he said. I said, yes, sir, for sure. Writing all these points down. A year later, this very hi-fi lady comes from Delhi, with these high heels and stilettos into the office. And she's like, your Vastu is horrible. And I'm there in that meeting. And Gaurav Bhai and I look at her and we're like, come again? And she's like, this is very, very wrong. I said, you understand how much pain they've taken to put the tune in that stool where he's supposed to sit? And he said, the entire thing is wrong. Like, are you? And he spent again a bomb to change his entire executive cabinet in a year's time. We changed the entire thing again. And his my client's father was my dad's client back then. So it was like the generation after generation. So he said, my son has become mad, even you become mad behind this Vastu, and you're just spending my money out. So I was like, uncle, I'm sorry, but it is not on my scope at all. So I think Vastu is something which I believe in to an extent. I have changed my position because of that. So I wouldn't say I don't believe in it, but I think being so blinded by it and going so all out crazy is a little bit too much. And I think we need to draw a line somewhere. So yeah, I can take you to some places.
Vastu is something that every 2 years I think I've mastered, and every time I meet a new Vastu guy and they teach me something new. So as a practice, we do a lot of private homes, sometimes in Central India, North India, sometimes in South India. And every time we come across a Vastu guy whose Vastu principles are completely different than what we've learned in the past. So from somebody else. Every time you come up, you go to the client and the client asks you, Vastu? You say, yeah. I tell him, yeah, of course, I've done 2-3 houses with Vastu. Now I go with a plan, and my first plan is like completely broken apart because Vastu guys, you don't know anything. So with Vastu, I've kind of given up. They are lead designers, and we are always second designers to them. That's how if they are happy, the client is happy, and you are happy. So that's they are.
I agree.
I have done a lot of work in life. Started off, first I had no idea of Vastu. The one day somebody came and told us, you don't know Vastu? I don't know Vastu. Vastu. Then the guy came from Chennai and he did the Vastu, is that. For 10 years, we followed the guy. Finally, we realized that it's doing nothing for us. Then we got hold of another Vastu guy who came from Hyderabad, I think. So then that happened. Finally, after spending 20 years in Vastu, we realized that it's not going anywhere. Then we got this guy, he said, forget Vastu, Feng Shui.
Feng Shui.
Feng Shui is it. So I was convinced, because we always looking to get convinced, because we always have some problems in life. So we want to solve them by these external clutches. So then for 10 years we did Feng Shui. Now I don't want to see any of these guys. We're doing some work, and the architect asked me, well, what about Vastu? And I said, I don't want to know it. You follow your design. Whatever is the best design is my best Vastu. I don't care. I was sitting, sleeping in different directions. That's out of the window. And now,
Mr. Dalwal, I've made it it's compulsory in my studio now that we tell the clients, if you are interested in Vastu or not, please talk to a consultant once. We have a consultant, please talk to her once, because tomorrow you come and tell me that you went to someone's, because people, all these aunties come home and then tumhara gas yahan pe, this is very wrong, the architect is not good. So like, it's better that you get a consultant. You are sure you don't want the Vastu, then only I will. I don't believe it. One client was an atheist. Last year we worked on their home. They didn't believe in Vastu at all. I got the consultant, and now they don't move without Vastu. So I think I'm glad I did it. You keep changing the designs.
The guy who doesn't believe, leave him alone. Don't.
Never. Exactly. You're like ruffling
months.
his feathers, Ali.
Huh? Sorry, Priya?
It happened with me once with this Vastu on the same platform. We were designing a kitchen. So the Vastu person comes and says, you can't have fire and water on the same platform, right? You can't have the kitchen, the hob, and the sink.
Yeah.
So he said, why? He said, because mother-in-law and daughter-in-law mein patni nahi wali hai, to aap dono. Instantly, they changed the entire thing. In 1 minute, my entire plan got changed. They're like, no, yeah, that's why I think we both don't get along. You're right. Let's change the entire kitchen. What to do? And also, I had a very funny incident. This Delhi thing was very funny. Somebody came, they were moving from Delhi to Bombay, and they approached me for their house. It's a very big house. It was like 5,000 square foot or something. I said, okay, what is your budget? So he said, my dad has given me X amount. This is my budget. This much you put in the house and this much I need. I said, for what? So he said, I need to buy a car. No, I said, if you're giving me this much budget for the house and such a big budget for your car, why don't you start living in your car only? Because it's impossible to do your house. Like we get like funny kind of clients from everywhere trying to tell us that, let's do this and let's not do this. And sometimes it's just hilarious.
I once had a client with supernatural powers. Every time I had the intention of raising an invoice to him, he would guess. And he would come up with a list of people who owed him money and cry in front of me. Just after we've finished the design discussion, this is what would start. Even before, I could, tell him, bye, Abhi, it's time for the next stage of payment. So he would come up with his long list, and then every time I would come up with new strategies of how to, extract money out of the guy. But I think he was quite a master, and I think he still owes me money. But that's so yeah.
Okay,
So you face.
next question for you, Rajiv. On team building, what challenges do you find, or did you find, in building a team in your office?
So when we started the office, obviously, I started the office with 2 people, including myself, and there was a peon and there was 1 architect. So that 1 architect had to obviously do a lot of things, client servicing. He had to be good at drawings and also BOQs, 3Ds, and things like that. So initially there was a lot of challenges in terms of having people like we spoke earlier. Also, we try to hire people who can do a lot more. And I've been lucky, to be quite honest. I've had very good employees who really delivered extraordinary projects for the office, and that's something that happens. And also, what I've done is we've kept the office very flat. We've just started having a hierarchy and having associates and things like that. So it's really a learning process. Once in a while, there are certain HR issues in terms of employees not gelling on projects, and employees having issues with each other, but you kind of sort them out. So that's all that we've kind of faced so far.
I think like one of the things that's worked very well for us is that with the whole term of human resources, like personally, I feel each individual person in the studio helps the studio grow. And because a lot of us are at that peak level or the smaller stage, we tend to value our employees more and give them a more rounded role in the office. It's not only making drawings or making a 3D, they're also doing project management, they're doing design, and they are working on multiple facets of the project. So each time I hire a new employee, I actually have a talk with them that I'm not giving you a job, it's a growth opportunity. You help market the studio and talk about the studio and bring a project in, and we are very happy to give or share the project fee or give a commission on that. Because if the employee feels that he's growing with the office, there is beyond a point, it's very hard to have an employee feel he's growing in the organization. Just one way of doing it is to offer a flat fee. It's very hard for architects to keep constant work flowing into the studio. So rather than that, give more financial responsibility to the people who help bring projects for the studio, and that has helped us keep employees and also grow a little, over the years. So there's one other thing I'd like to share.
Also, when we hire anybody for our office, I always tell them that I'm just not only the designer. I'm giving you a free hand to design as well, because I want you also to express and show your designs and your talent. What have you studied for? You've just not studied to do AutoCAD and sit on one desk. I mean, you should explore your designs, because there are such amazing upcoming designers out there, and it's amazing to see their works. So when you blend in and you fuse their ideas with yours and the clients, I feel it turns out way better than just sticking to only your design principle. And there's great talent out there, and we all should give them a chance to, design or to explore or to come up out there. I also tell them that go one-on-one with the client and take up meetings, learn what it is, go sit with the contractor, sit on site. I mean, that's very important. And I feel when you give them that chance, they automatically love your firm more. They want to work for you harder. They want to be with you longer. So that is also very important, the kind of relationship you build with your team, when you build your team, I feel.
I think what you're saying more is about responsibility that you give the client.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
designer. I think we also do that a lot more now, because I remember at my dad's time, there's a very different way of even the way, designers of that time, like I worked with Firoza Netherwala also for 2 years. The way they used to design and execute with their team is very different from the way we think. We want to give them opportunity. Earlier, it was more like they were just like draftsmen in the firm, or they were just doing AutoCAD and, designing exactly what, until they still he does everything. He'll sketch out everything, every small nook and corner. But we don't work like that. I think it's more about how we talk about collaborations with other furniture designers, lighting designers, architects, etc. We are also, it's very important, I think, to have designers be able to speak. Otherwise, they're just sitting over there and drafting. So we usually, what we do is that we just now give them responsibility that you lead the meeting with the contractors, you lead the meeting with the clients. We are there if there's anything, and you realize that they are a little nervous. It's not as smooth as what they are in the office. When they get out, they are a little scared. But I think that really helps them a lot when in gaining confidence and in being able to have confidence in their design and what they are working for. So I think that kind of collaboration is extremely important, and I think most of us, the young designers, are working, and especially boutique designers like us, are working towards that.
And I just feel like for women, especially when I get working mothers, I get mums and other from all sorts of fields, right? So sometimes it becomes very difficult for them to multitask. So I have to keep like telling them that it's fine, you do your work, you do your best here, you can do your housework as well and come here, concentrate in office, and then go back in, it's very difficult sometimes for them to juggle between site and office work and their household work, and sometimes with their kids. It's very difficult for women to play a multi-designer role, you can say. So if you have like a guiding light, or if you have like an inspirational model, or you tell them, or give them a guidance that, this is how you can go about things, it becomes way easier for them, and to motivate them that, look, you have great talent, you have great designs, just work on it, don't quit. You have to keep motivating employees as well. Don't quit. You can get there. So I feel that is also very important, to play a very a role model, you can say, for your team.
So that was the question I was going to come to next, actually, Priya. Like, what are the things you guys do to motivate your employees? Like, any of y'all can answer this question.
But they're in a profession where every employee is a potential architectural firm of his own or her own.
Yeah.
So, after what does it take to become a one-man architectural firm or a design firm? So how, keeping that in mind, how do you keep the flock together, and not that he wants to go off on his own?
I think one of the things you have to also remember is that, it's very important to be very selective of who you hire and how you hire. It's something which I have learned over the years in a very difficult process. You know, like there's
Yeah.
only so much that you can do to motivate an employee. But if that employee is not reciprocating work, and we as business owners keep on trying and giving opportunity after an opportunity, they are many times working on paid projects where clients, where finances are being shared responsibly, you know, where you are responsible for the finances, you are responsible for timelines, and a series of events can happen if things are not managed properly. So in terms of motivating, I think it's something where it's a very recent phenomena where there are short attention spans, and it's very important, I feel, as businesses to protect ourselves from the whims and fancies of an employee sometimes. And this is something where I think most practices have faced issues with two employees leaving in the middle of a project or leaving the responsibility halfway. Who faces the end of it? It's the business owner. And that's
Yeah.
where I feel it's important that smaller practices and larger practices, since most of us have been working in a very informal environment, we start formalizing through a series of processes. You know,
Yeah.
so the whole idea of doing app-based management was something which we are still at the very nascent stage. But at some point, we have to also relook at it from the point that the role of the employee, if they are just another person working on a certain role, or are they going to help you grow with the studio? So to like evaluate that is very important, I think, as business owners, as you start growing. You know, very important to make a smart hire, I feel. And also sort of just try and accept the fact that people will rotate within your studio. So try and protect yourself as much as you can, motivate the employee and keep them interested by doing something new and giving them more and more responsibility. Like how like Vivek said, each employee is a potential firm on its own in tomorrow. So it's important to sort of also keep that on the back end when you are like structuring your organization.
I think it's also something you have to accept, right? Like we all were there at some point, even though
Right.
so you had your dad's business. Everyone, a lot of us have our own dad's shoes to get into. Uh, at some point, you do know that they are going to rotate. They are going to go and create their firms, like Mr. Talwar said. So I think that that's something that I have accepted. Like, you know, I mean, earlier it used to really pinch us 5 years ago that, oh God, he's leaving us and go now what? But I think it's something that life moves on, and I think everyone wants to. Therefore, a year or two, if it's a good designer, 100%. I think Priya, we had someone in common who we know that, you know, she wanted to go out and start working, and she did. If she was that good, I mean, if they're that good, then automatically they just have to. I mean, I think I would encourage them also to go and start off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I always encourage my employees, or if I feel they're that capable, I tell them that you should go and explore. I mean, if you have the capability, you don't know where you will be and where one day you will reach. And we are there to help them learn, grow. But now I just feel I know for a fact that I've never had an employee who has stuck around more than 3 years maximum in my firm. So I've just accepted that fact that they all want to move on. And generally in like small boutique firms, you always have younger designers coming to you and who want to learn and experience. So you just have to move along, and you have to accept the fact that all employees are going to be on a rotational period. There are very few who are going to stick around for very long. And it's fine.
Do stick around. It's not. We have someone in our office who almost 7 years now as a designer, and I think he's happy because he's growing. And this is more like I mean, the times that are there right now, you know, there's security for a lot of them.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not. I think we have a good amount of chunk of people who want the security, like how people are doing jobs. You know, I think so. It's very relative. I think.
Yeah.
But do you have a flat organization, or there's a hierarchy? What helps?
Hierarchy.
I think hierarchy.
Hierarchy, I think, helps in a bigger firm, in a bigger, you know, setup. In our smaller setups, in boutique firms, we do have hierarchy, but it's mentally understood. There are no designations, or there's not that particular name that you give as an associate or a project manager. It's everyone's doing the same thing, but they mentally know that, okay, this guy is more knowledgeable, or is there for more years than us, but not a tag that we have for them as yet.
Yeah. I think hierarchy is inevitable when you grow. I never believed in a hierarchy when we started. Everybody would directly work with me, but as we've kind of grown, I've also felt the need to have more associates and handle the office, because you can't be in office all the time. You need to put the onus on somebody else who's handling the team when you are on a side and you're outside outside the city, outside the country. So in that sense, I think you do need to have a hierarchy, but in terms of because I mean we still are at the scale where every employee is directly working with us. Our practice is pretty flat in that sense.
I think to add to what Rajiv is saying, it's also sort of important sometimes to evaluate what is the potential of an employee. And if
Yeah.
the employee is able to take up a leadership role where in the
Yeah.
absence of the principal, they're able to guide the project through and guide the team through. I think that's how, as a practice, you end up identifying who you want to take the extra sort of an effort to retain or
Yeah.
to sort of grow with the studio. And I think that is something to remember as designers when you're working in a studio. Take the opportunity to make the other designers in your studio better around you. And if you do that, the firm will notice it, and that
Yeah.
goes a long way actually.
I'll just give you a small example. So I was expecting, and my last 2 months, you can say the last 2 months were, I had to be literally on bed rest. And then once you deliver, it's very difficult to get back on site or on your feet, immediately. You need some time with your baby, right? So I was in such a big dilemma. I was like, how am I going to do this? My sites are going on and it's going to be so difficult. But touch wood, I don't know what happened, but my team was so supportive. We had already scheduled things from before and said that, okay, all of this needs to get over by this date. My team and me were always in touch. I had an associate level, like a very experienced designer come in on board, and she is a mother as well, right, herself. So she could relate to me, and she's like, don't worry, I will be there as an associate designer and I will manage everything, since I have finished most of the designing bit. And then you have to trust them, and you have to, there has to be a trust factor, and just give it all out there. And she managed my entire office, I mean, while I was away for so long. So I also feel that and if your office and your employees are supportive, and no matter what, you can face all your challenges together.
Okay, great. We've got audience questions. So Anika, will you take the question?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got one question. It's from an anonymous sender. Hi guys, how do you gauge your studio's efficiency? Has anyone figured out a formula to understand productivity of yourself or your team on a project? Do you keep an eye on your bottom line? Sorry for so many questions.
I just like to add something because I'm a little bit of a nerd for mathematics and numbers, and it's actually not a bad way to. It's not a bad idea to take a management approach and study what management schools teach you in terms of processing, in terms of processes, in terms of trying to use mathematical ratios. Like a simple thing, what I've been able to sort of do from a ratio perspective is that, say if we are working on an interior project, it's a 3 BHK project, we've got drawing lists of what we've done in the past. So we've got 200 drawings being made for a 3 BHK project. Each drawing you try and fix an X amount of time to it. So these are ways where you can try and calculate that the whole project will take maybe 500 man hours from the studio, 500 man hours at site. Based on that, we need to allocate so many resources, which would help us to take a project in the future. So doing little bit of management with these mathematical ratios really helps. And I learned that in Switzerland, where a lot of firms in Europe, because they work on an hourly basis, per week, where like in the States as well, where you are working 35 to 42 hours a week, you need to be very disciplined with your time that you spend on a project. And if an employee or we ourselves as designers are spending more time than we should, we need to sort of evaluate the project. Why is the time being spent? Is there a problem on the studio's end? Is there a problem on the client's end? Is there a problem on the contractor's end? And sometimes this sort of a mathematical or a management-based approach can really help you tackle problems which you don't know exist. within the studio or within the site or within the client base.
By the way, this question is from Suleiman Banji, Suli of Design Matrix. I'm sure all of you know him.
Oh,
Awesome.
Anyone wants to add anything to that, or should we move to the next question?
I think Arjuna answered quite well.
Yeah, I think Arjun has said everything.
Okay, so another question we have from Samir Talpade. What are your views on
Hi,
outsourcing?
Samir.
Sorry. What are your views on outsourcing certain posts, even those of co-designers, in these days of social distancing and work from home and Zoom?
Sorry, I didn't answer the question.
Yeah, what is the question?
What
What
are
are your
your
views
on outsourcing posts, like posts of like certain people in your firm, instead of having them in your firm, you'd rather outsource them, including
Freelancer.
Freelancers rather.
Okay, yeah.
Freelancers. I think to manage our team only right now is a bit difficult to outsource. Right now, at this point, I don't think we're outsourcing at all. We have enough of our designers who are managing everything, and things are obviously very different now. So for outsourcing, of course, for views, for 3D renders and all of that, constantly we are doing that outside. We don't have designers who do 3D views and visuals and animations, etc. Graphic design for that matter, branding and all of that we're doing right now. We're working on some websites. All that is outsourced. But I think in terms of designers, interior designers, we're getting lots and lots of messages during this lockdown that we are looking for internships. But right now we're not taking off. I mean, I don't know about the other three.
I think I'd rather keep the people I have than try and kind of outsource. I know a lot of designers are doing that, but we have. I mean, this is a difficult time for everyone. So I think the best thing to do is to kind of manage the team that you have rather than let go of them and try and outsource. Outsourcing is just. I just feel that it's ethically wrong to do it at this time.
I agree with Ali and Rajiv as well. We are just sticking to who we have right now and working with them and managing our team.
And also, I mean, before lockdown, I mean, we as a practice believed strongly in a kind of team-based approach. I never looked at myself as the design principal and draftsman around me. Everybody in my office is a proud designer. So in that sense, I think it's really I really feel that a team is bigger than the sum of the individuals in it. So I would never try and outsource design work. Of course, there's things like CDUs, like Ali said, there's things that we don't do in the office. Maybe those are things that can be outsourced, but not design. Then I don't think you have any ownership on it, do you? If you're going to outsource that. So yeah.
Okay. We have another question from Suli. Do you collaborate with stylists?
Yes. Sorry.
Yes.
And one of them is right here watching us and sending me screenshots on the phone. That's why I got distracted. Samir. We collaborated with him on all our projects. I think it's extremely important. And since the time he's come on board with us, and for a lot of other designers like Rajiv and Priya were here both.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been helping us sort of like use our lights in the shoots. He's been very helpful in promoting us parallelly. I think great
Right.
thanks to him for that.
Style God.
Samir paid me to say good things about him, but no, I think it's very important to have a stylist on board. I think to complete the project and give it decorate it with that final look to get for the project and the concept, I think they're extremely important. And I feel that suddenly there's the last 2 years, everyone's having a stylist and getting a stylist on board.
Yeah.
After a point, we all feel, correct me if I'm wrong, is that after a point, as a designer or as an architect, you feel like you've done your skeleton, you've done everything. But the nitty-gritties of small nooks and corners, I think the way they bring their design and their ideas to the table, I somehow lack it sometimes. The small decor items and stuff like that. Just placing it the right way for your perfect frame in the picture. I think those things I completely trust them to do it the best.
I didn't realize that there was such a creature as stylist. I mean, are they designers or where do they come from? What's you know?
So it's become a big.
The only stylist I know of is a hairstylist. I mean, I don't,
These guys really make a lot of difference. There's
Yeah, they do.
profession now out of this. There's so many stylists who actually message us and ask us to give us new jobs. And when you realize that, Mr. Talwar, is when you have that frame, your perfect picture that gets created in your portfolio that comes out. The way I have styled it and the way they have styled it is very different.
Yeah, I agree.
Very differently.
So I'll just give you an example. We did a shoot. We had to do a shoot. So it was my first time working with a stylist, and obviously photographers we've always worked with. And I'm like, listen, there's no painting, there's no rug, there is no chair, but I have to get this house shot. So what do we do? So they help you create the perfect ambience, the perfect shot for your shoot. And he's like, okay, let's get a rug from here, let's get a planter from here, let's get a chair from here, and let's hire a painting from here, And actually, I'm not joking, my shoot was fabulous because 80% of the house was done. 20%, how clients say that, okay, we'll do later, we'll figure things out later. And that's what I felt the stylist did. It just, it was just magic to my space.
I think one more thing to add regarding stylists is that, it extends a little bit the whole concept of collaboration. Because stylists, they also help you set up the house on a permanent basis, not only for shoots. I mean, they're fabric stylists, they are stylists, they are like consultants who help you choose accessories, which usually, the architect has spent maybe 6 months plus to a year, maybe longer on a project. And how does he leave the project and exit if he's doing every small detail on the project? And the more people I feel you engage within the community, they add a different perspective onto your project, which might be a very strong value. But also to remember, these are your co-collaborators also talk about your work to other projects that they work with or clients who they work with. So it's a very strong way to build a two-way working relationship with a lot of people who you collaborate with in the market.
And I feel, Arjun, it's a completely different ball game altogether.
Yeah.
The way they do it now, we've used your rights on so many of our sites, for shoots, not only for shoots, but even when the clients buy. And when you get a stylist on board, I feel that the clients also get a bit more professional, more strict with their, when we tell them that, there's this supposed to be taken and all of that, and a stylist says it makes a lot of difference.
It's a fresh opinion. Yeah. It might be the same thing what you've been saying, but when they hear it, it's the same thing. We take the same advice when we hear it the 10th time from somebody else. It hits them.
Right. And like you rightly said, 6-8 months if you're working on a project, the client also needs a fresh perspective to the space.
So after I finished that shoot, my client bought the 2 chairs, my client bought the rug, my client bought the planter, my client bought everything, which I was trying to convince him for 3 months. Please buy, let's finish it. It was done in that one shoot.
So Sulli is saying that we need stylists on this panel. So you need to connect me to stylists.
Yes.
Stylists.
And we have a question from Poonam Mehta. How do you convince clients to hire stylists? Because by the end of projects, clients usually hit dead end.
Yeah, they exhaust. They say that there are no money there.
So
they start the project like that sometimes, Anika. Just
I just start the project like that. I have a separate.
No, I'd like to just sort of add one of the funny stories on the client end when clients sort of tend to freeze fees or freeze these things on saying that we don't have a budget. Each time as passionate designers, we take up the project as a challenge. Okay, let's freeze our fee. Let's work the extra bit, take on an extra role. And then suddenly the same client is buying bathroom fittings more than what the budget was discussed at the start, over there.
Yeah.
And that's when you think that where did the budget go? So it's all about making the client sort of find value in the service you're going to bring with a different service provider. If he finds value in the stylist and you have to convince him, it's also your role to convince the client that he can do something which I can't do. And that is something very important for designers to also tell the client, because as architects or as interior designers, there's this whole air in the market that we are masters of knowledge of every field. We are not. Like, it's impossible for one person to have knowledge on each and every material, each and every aspect of design. Like, it gets more and more complex as you go year after year. So that's why a stylist who's a specialist in materials or in accessories, these are things what is important. I realized to tell the client with no ego as a designer that I don't know certain things. These are things what this guy can bring on board for you.
I think last couple of
last two questions we have. One question from Shantanu Garg. What do you guys enjoy as a boutique practice? Small scale boutique spaces with bespoke narratives, or a large size project with repetition, scale, and quantum?
Rajiv, you go for this.
So I like larger projects, and I disagree with the idea that there's going to be repetition in a larger project and not a small project. You can bring out your best, your creative abilities in a large project as well. We've been doing a lot of homes for joint families, which are pretty big, and obviously because the user of each room is different, their brief is very different to us. So even though you're doing one project, it's like doing a project for kind of multiple clients in that sense, and it's a fun process because you are involved in the project for a longer time, and there's more of a feeling of ownership to that kind of project. So yeah. Hi Shantanu.
Okay, so should we move to the last question? Maybe last, yeah. We have a question from Dhwani Shah. As Arjun spoke about time management as a designer, however hard you try to be in tandem with the client's requirements, which keep changing, how do we go about that as we keep losing time in only designing rather than starting to actually execute?
Yeah, so I think it's just about sort of, very important to make things clear at the start, which most of us take for granted. And we are so excited to work on our first project or second or like, your most recent design project. It's important to make it clear that, or also gauge as a designer that your time is your most valuable asset. If you are going, like how we were talking about stylist, if you're going to the fabric shop 8 times in the course of 6 months to choose which curtain because the client hates the color now, it's never going to end for you. And it's very important that designers start getting into contracts. Most people don't get into work contracts, and that's a very bad thing. It's a bad culture that's been built over the years. And if a client is not willing to sign a contract, don't do work with him. That's what I talk about when the whole community comes together and says that these are certain practices that we follow. This is the role of a designer.
Yeah.
Nobody expects a carpenter to go with you to a fabric shop and choose your fabric, in over there. So try and define what roles you will do, what roles your consultants will do. And that's how you can manage your time, because you have to work on multiple projects, which are going to be at different stages at every time.
Yes.
Which will need different points of attention.
So what we do is that before we take up a client, we tell them we'll take 1 month only for your designing, and we freeze on your plans, we freeze on your mood boards, we freeze on your elevations, everything. So 80% of our work is already done, and then we begin our project. So that saves us a lot of time.
And please charge a rework fee. Like, make it amply clear that once you've reached a certain phase and crossed a certain phase, because if you see the whole design community out of India, they are extremely united. Like, they are so structured that when clients cross a certain phase and they want to go back to it, that fear of losing the fear of losing a project should not be in our mind itself. Like, if they value your time and your service on the project, the fear of losing the architect because they are unwilling to pay a certain fraction of rework fee should also be there in the client's mind. It's a two-way process, I feel.
So practices abroad, I think they charge a fixed fee, and then there's a charge on the timelines of each person on the project. That's how a scope of work and fee proposal is structured internationally. Unfortunately, in India, that's really not the case. I think that's something that we should, as a community, come together and structure together.
Okay.
So Lee has asked a couple of times on a PR agency, whether you guys are working or would work with a PR agency, and how important is that?
I think, it's very simple. If you can do your, especially interior designing, we get confused between this question why I'm answering so quickly is because I get questioned this very often. I think we get confused between PR and advertising and branding. They're very different topics. What we expect from PR agencies, even I did a couple of years ago, is that you get me work, you get me to do collaborations, you get me to do brand, collaborations of the sorts that people are doing and advertise my product. That's not what they do. The whole main thing about PR is to get you covered in magazines, features, national, international magazines, all of that. But if you can do these kind of things on your own, if you can manage a social media page, if you can manage your marketing, your website, everything on your own, which we are doing right now. We are good with our Instagram. I'm not the best, but we are at least managing, putting out content over there. If you can manage that, I don't think you require a PR agency. If you have, especially now in today's time, I think we started this note that Mr. Talwar has these kind of parties that he had last year. Gets the entire, Arjun said, gets the entire community together, the fraternity together. So when you meet the fraternity together, you meet editors, you're in touch with these magazines and all of that. When you've got that kind of a rapport, you don't really need a PR agency. You can pick up the call and just or send an email. I don't think pick up the call, send an email, keep it professional, and just manage the PR in that manner is what I at least do. Because we did have a PR agency, they did help us, but at the end of it, I think that personal touch that you have with an editor of magazines is very different from what the PR agency can really do for you. But again, my take on it, it could be different for someone else.
Now, just something to add on what was shared by Ali also is that PR is such a different job from profession to profession. With us in design, PR needs a very different approach, whereas most PR agencies are fairly generic, where they have a fashion brand, they have a food and FMCG brand, and then there's another architect going in over there. So it's also important for PR agencies to have a clear-cut plan of what are they going to do for architects and how will they help them either build their marketing or their branding. And it's very important for a studio to also evaluate what do you want from your PR agency. Do you only want a host of publications? Do you want them to have a different role where they help you connect to certain markets? So there's so many things what you need to evaluate. And I think it is important to sort of think about in the present day, because I feel in the age of social distancing, how you reach out to faraway markets, it's not a bad idea to try and reach out, help and try a short-term assignment with some agency who can really convince you that they bring value on board for you.
But I also think, Arjun, correct me if I'm wrong, that the PR agency that we've been in touch with in the country, they are not, they're very specific to, just features. They're only specific to publications. They don't have that kind of a broad spectrum of things that they can bring to the table besides just doing that. And I'm talking
I agree. It's a challenge for PR firms to rethink what PR is for the design industry.
Absolutely.
And that's very important for us to give specific feedback to such agencies also, that publications, just to share a little bit further to extend that most of us don't subscribe to the magazines that we get in our studios, which are sent by post month in, month out. So the value of publication is something which is going to be evaluated. And if a PR agency is only focusing on publication, it's only going to go so much more. So as designers, if we make a plan that this is what we want, can the PR agency give it to us, push them to work the way you want to? I think there's some value to that.
I think they need that. They need to understand that, because even trying to explain that to them as well. That you can't just tell us that you're giving us publications. We can also get that. And what we realize also is that editors also start getting irritated, because if today, suppose we four are there, Priya, Arjun, Rajiv, and Ali. If she's going to go and take that same to an editor of a magazine, going on talking about us, they also get irritated. At the end of it, you're getting the same guys again and again.
I agree.
Very true.
Honestly, up till now, I've never hired a PR agency. I'm not joking, because what I was so content. I was like, okay, we're getting word of mouth, clients, it's fine, But as of now, I have never hired a PR agency. I'm being honest.
Okay, guys, we're way over time where we thought we'd finish in 60 minutes. We're almost at 90 minutes.
Wow.
And we can
Wow.
then I think we can just go on. I think we're going to carry this on at our next lunch or next dinner.
Looking forward.
I hope in the next few months we've forgotten about what is going on right now, and I'm quite hopeful about that. I'm an ever optimist.
100%. Thank you so much, Mr. Tewal. Thank you, Anika, for having us.
Thanks, Anika. Thanks, Mr. Tewal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. This was a lot of fun, a lot of fun, and a very, very interesting session. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.